Welcome and thank you for joining the 504 Connect call. Before we begin, please ensure you've opened the WebEx participant and chat panels by using the associated icons located at the bottom of your screen. Please note that all audio connections are muted at this time. Should you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Bill Menger, Associate Administrator. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, everybody, and welcome to our last call of the fiscal year. Certainly welcome you all, and we've had a really banner year for the 504 program. That's due in part to the introduction of the 25-year debenture last year, and also the low interest rates that are out there right now for our small businesses to take advantage of. Certainly getting a 25-year term at a fixed rate as low as they are right now is really a huge benefit to small businesses looking to acquire fixed assets. So on the first slide, I just want to show you quickly here, this was the priority goal to increase the number of loans to small businesses in socially and economically disadvantaged urban communities and rural areas. The table on the left breaks it down by SBA region, and it shows you what was approved in terms of units and dollars. It shows you what is in hub zones, specifically urban hub zone approval count, and then on the right it shows you again how we increased that number over the course of the fiscal year. And so we did very well. We can always do a little bit better next year, but certainly I think we did very well. So we'll go to the next slide. This shows you year-to-date activity for both programs. And as you can see, the 7A lending program was down slightly this year. We found more loans to be made conventionally by our lending partners. They weren't using the SBA program quite as much as they have in the past, but still a very good number, and we're probably going to have a final number. By the way, these numbers are at the end of August. So by the end of this month, September, that number is probably going to be closer to 22, maybe even closer to $23 billion for 7A. In 504, as you can see, we did have that very strong uptick this year. We're up probably just over 4%, I guess, year to date. And so you can see that we, right now, as of August 31st, we were just over $4.5 billion for just over about 5,500 individual loans. Next slide, please. This shows our underserved markets. We didn't quite do as well in some of these markets over the last year. We have a small downtick in minority, women, and veterans. We look to, again, increase those in FY 2020, and certainly look to all of you to help us reach those markets and make more loans to small businesses owned by those demographic units. The next slide, I'll show you the very good news we've had in franchise activity. Franchise activity definitely has been up the last couple of years overall, and in this year we've had an increase in 504 loans going to franchises over last year. You can see that, as of August 31st, again, 560 loans were to franchises for $762,812,000. And then you can see what we did also in the 7A program. Again, the 7A program was down slightly over last year's very strong year in loans to franchises. And this is partly due to the fact that we have the online directory listing all of the eligible franchises. There are now over 4,000 eligible brands for SBA financing. And again, we look forward to having a continuing strong growth in franchise lending in the coming fiscal year. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Diana Seward and Ginger Allen.
You could try.
Sure. Oh, okay. Hi, thanks.
We're going to turn it over to Steve Kucharski instead of Diana Seaborn first.
Oh, okay.
It's age before beauty.
Oh, all right. My goodness. All right. Yeah, I know. So just quickly, we have talked a lot about some 504 modernization projects, and just to highlight some of the things we're working on. One is, I'll just say, because this crosses most loan programs, but 504 and our community evangelism was our first folks into it, so we always want to make sure we announce lender match enhancements are coming up. We've refined the search criteria for lender match, so for folks that are using that, lenders now have the ability to drill down into specific types of borrowers that they were never able to before, so they can help mine the data a little differently and help them get to a match quicker. That's already out. Coming into production this fall, we'll be talking more about it at the conferences, and we'll be releasing some marketing stuff on it. We'll be giving folks the ability to, within the Capital Access Financial System shell, be able to convert a lender match into a not necessarily applicable on the 504 loan side, but for community advantage lenders, I think that'll be a big help. So it's kind of a fintech approach to lender match. And then specific to 504, we have our corporate governance project, where we have well over, I think, 120 CDCs that are participating, sending in documents. This is enabling OCRM to review the documents faster in a document warehouse. Also with some validation criteria to make sure you're submitting the right documentation, so we're getting good feedback on that. We are in a testing stage with 504 closing. So if you remember, we went through a pretty lengthy process where we gathered a document, got some agreements from our Office of General Counsel, from folks out in the field, from CDCs, and everyone in between. So we got a blueprint on how we were going to attack 504 closing. We have put together a prototype, and that's being tested now, and then we'll hopefully be rolling that out into production fairly soon. And then also we're going back doing some more research on our 504 authorization, which is the loan authorization is the bane of my existence. It's always been a challenging thing to automate, but we're trying to attack that again. What else, Sherry? Anything else I should mention?
I think you hit it all.
Yeah. So those are the big highlights. A lot of work going on in 504 modernization. Really appreciate all the folks both in the industry side that have leaned in and served as guinea pigs for us. And then also there's been a ton of collaboration. This couldn't be done without the help of Linda Riley and Diana's team in terms of informing the policy, and then on the center side, June and SLPC and everything they're doing out there. And then also with OCRM helping on the corporate governance. So this is really just us using technology to tie together the good things that are happening in all these offices. So thank you.
Oh, the other thing is the RPA. They're testing the bots.
Yeah, so we have something also coming down the road a little bit, our first foray into doing actually having a robotic approach to processing some of this data. So I won't talk about too much until we formulate it, but we think there's some interesting things on just how to, and really it's for people to think of old forms of like optical character recognition and being able to process paper documents at a really fast pace. This is like the next evolution of that. So we're doing some piloting with that with one of our centers and leveraging our CSA contract to do it. So more to come on that in the future. So thanks, Ginger.
Thank you. Okay, I guess it's my turn, folks. It's Diana Seaborn. Good afternoon and happy fall, y'all. I want to thank Steve for recognizing my team, because usually he's the genius boy that runs up and down the hall. So it must be a red letter day when he recognizes all of us, June and Linda and I, for what we do to contribute. Oh, so Max, Steve.
Okay.
We've got a couple of hot topics to cover. The fee notice, Lucky 504 program here. The fee notice is out, and we know what the fees are for the 504 program. The upfront guarantee fee remains at 50 basis points. The annual service fee for regular 504 is 32 bips, and the debt refinance annual service fee is 39.5 bips. So we have reduced the fee for the annual service fee for the program, because the program is operating so wonderfully. We've had such a great year. We were very, very pleased, and you guys have done a wonderful job of working together for all the third-party lenders on the phone please accept our sincere thanks and our encouragement that you participate in these calls, to the maximum extent possible. It's very important for us to know what the third-party lender's experience is like in our 504 loans, and things that impact you will impact us. So never hesitate to either reach out through your CDCs or through Linda Riley's office or any of the district offices to have conversations about issues or concerns or even positive things that happen for you in our 504 loan program. One of the other things that we've done this year is extend the rural pilot. It was originally scheduled to run through July of 2020, and we went ahead and extended it out to 2021. We had kind of a slow start on this program. I guess as of June, we had 8 loans totaling about $2.93 million done under the rural pilot, and we understand that it's very difficult to commit assets and resources to a program that doesn't have a very long life. It's an investment of time and marketing money and resources, so we wanted to extend 2021 in the hopes that you would find greater opportunities to participate in that program and some comfort in moving some resources into those areas. For rural county, it includes any county that the Census Bureau classifies as greater than or equal to 30% rural, and the CAPS homepage has a link to the U.S. Census Bureau data in the event that you want to check that out. We have aligned the pilot with the definition of rural used in the 7A and the 504 regular programs, so the CDCs must continue to use the U.S. Census Bureau table for the purposes of identifying those rural counties. If you have specific issues about areas that you know to be rural that for some reason are not showing up that way, please reach out to us and let us know. We do understand that it's well-intended and best done, but there's always room for improvement, and there's some obvious situations where we don't have areas properly classified as rural. So we would like to continue to have the dialogue as necessary for the CDCs and also for the lenders on the phone. One of the other things that I wanted to chat briefly about is the Form 159, and I'll skip over the FERS numbers and what goes in and what doesn't go in now. I'll save that for our good friend Eddie Ledford from the Office of Credit Risk Management. But I do want to make a point about completing forms. I know that many of you on the phone are senior level business development CDCs. I hope you have some of your underwriters and processors on the phone, because sometimes they don't get the message that we send through about the need to complete documents fully. If there's a blank on a page, it needs to be completed. It needs to be completed as designated with no additional characters, no additional information. And the reason this is incredibly important for you is that this data is what we use to make rules and guidelines for the program. So if it's not accurate, then the rules and the guidelines are not going to be reflective of what your true experience is, whether that's completing agent information on SBA Form 149, the 1244 information, the characteristics of your applicants and the individuals involved. It's very important for us. Not only does SBA use this data, but DNB shares this data with the rest of their world. And, you know, DNB has a lot of great facts. We use them for a lot of reasons here at SBA, and I'm sure you do in your businesses as lenders. And it's very important that it be good information, because it's not only informative for us and your rules, but it's informative when DNB and others, the American Bankers Association, the Independent Community Bankers Association, the development company associations go and testify, and they provide information, they collaborate. They do it based a lot on the information that we collect from you. So please make sure that your team knows how important it is. I know we're always in a hurry. We're always trying to get things done yesterday. We know the drill, but it's very important for you, and it's good information for the rest of the world to know what the experiences are of your business and your clients and how that works for us in SBA. For those of you on the call that are CA lenders, as you know, we are coming down to the 12th hour, the 12th minute of the funding issue for 7A, which obviously will impact your ability to make any CA loan after September 30th. So know that we have knowledge of folks on the Hill today from the trade associations, working with the folks to pull through a resolution, and to the extent we are understanding, they are discussing a continuing resolution with what they call an anomaly that will allow us the funding to proceed probably through mid-November. Now, that's not a done deal. They are still discussing it. We have a great deal of support for it on the Hill, and they're diligently working to get us something so that we don't have to stop lending on October 1st. I would encourage any of you that have loans this week that are complete, sufficiently complete, that they are legitimately submitted to the system, that you go ahead and do that. That way you can be working those through if there's any, single 1 or 2 days that we may or may not have funding next week, that you don't have any clients waiting on that issue. So if you've got anything then you could put through legitimately, please do that before close of business September 30th. Unless we have something in the meantime. So we unfortunately can't provide a notice on what those fees are going to be and what the program's going to look like until they make that decision. And that decision, to my understanding, is that they said it will be reviewing it on Thursday or Friday of this week. So it will be late in the day when we get the information out to you, but we will have a notice to you ASAP. We will reach out to NADCO and to NAGLE for UCA lenders to make sure that you have the information just as soon as we have the information on how we're going to proceed, and we'll do that officially through a notice as well. I think that covers everything I have to say. So thanks for getting on the call. We really appreciate the attendance. We really appreciate the CDCs reaching out to their third-party lending partners and getting them on the line. The last thing I want to say again is that, for third-party lenders, how you use the program and how you feel about that program is very important to us. So anytime that you have issues with regard to the program or program guidelines, either through your CDC, through your trade associations, or through Linda Riley's office, please, come on in and let us know what's going on. This is how we develop policy. And that's conversation with stakeholders. You're a very important stakeholder to us in this program, so work with us on that along with your CDCs. That's it for me, and I'm going to turn it over to your chief, Linda Riley.
We've got some great announcements in 504. First of all, we have 2 new staff members, and we have someone who will be joining us Monday on a 90-day detail. First, we have Jacob Tachi, who's our new financial analyst. Going to be working with us, and you'll hear a lot more from him. He's going to be working with us on extension requests very soon, so I know many of you will want to get to know Jacob really well. Obviously, Ginger does an amazing job with all these trainings, and Warren as well. We have a new team member, Christina. Christina is going to be working with us also. We have a person who's going to be coming to us on detail who's actually a specialist in affiliation, and so that's Lynn Dijar Domenico, and she will teach me how to say her name more smoothly. But all of you will like Lynn a lot. She's an invaluable resource. She's going to be working with me and June and the Hens team, as well as she's going to be working with us, Warren and I, on setting up some executive director training for new CC executive directors. So more to come on that. But Dinah and I wanted to thank everybody for the incredible warm welcome that you've given us while we've been out at these lender conferences. I was at America East and at the Tennessee Lenders Conference. Dinah was at Flagel and at Rhode Island, and Tom Tote and his team have put together a terrific Lenders Conference in Alabama. And over again, we get comments, these connect calls keep us connected between all of these live events. What do you really need to have as curriculum? So we tried to glean it out from all the great ideas. So on today's call, we're going to focus on the new 912 and 1081 process, and we're going to have Ginger Allen go through that. We're going to have Eddie Ledford talk about the other big hot topic, so and the SLPC will be talking about the 1244 and helping to complete those forms, because screen outs are always on everyone's mind. So how can we avoid a screen out? How can we do a better job? So we'll kind of go through the presentations. All of us will remain on the call to the end for the Q&A. And if you have a question that we can't answer on today's call, we'll route it to the appropriate office. Now I'd like to turn it over to Ginger Allen.
Thanks, Linda. I want to take just a minute to talk about Forms 912 and 1081, some improvements we've made to the fingerprint collection process. And we're lucky enough to have Michelle Genovese and LaShun Johnson here in the room with us. So let us know if you have any questions on the process as we go along. Just type them into your chat box and we'll try to answer them for you. So over the summer, we made some improvements to the fingerprint collection process. We've contracted with a FBI-approved channeler, and basically they're just, their role in this process is to expedite fingerprint processing, collecting the fingerprints from your applicants and your new employees at the CDC, and getting those through to the FBI, getting the background check complete, and then getting us the results. And with this channeler in place, we're getting turnaround in just a couple days, 2 days, 3 days. Michelle's giving me fingers, 3 to 5 days, I think is what she's trying to say, which is quite a bit faster than what it has been in the past. But there is a little learning curve with this new process, so we wanted to give you a few hints that we've come up with over the last couple months. And so July 25th, we published information known as 5000-19014, and you can either click on the link there when you get your slides, or you can just pull it down from our website. The biggest hint here is whoever's getting fingerprinted, whether it's your applicant for a Form 912, or if it's one of your new employees at your CDCs using a Form 1081, they have to go online to the channeler's website at the link that you see up there, applicantservices.com/SBA, and they must start a new account under their own name. That's the only way they're going to be able to see the options for getting their fingerprints done. And the other big hint that we're seeing here is we're asking the CDCs first confirm that the individual has been fingerprinted before you upload the 912 character determination packages to E-Tran, and before you send us an email letting us know that it's been done. So please first verify that your person has been fingerprinted and then upload the packages to us. Here's what your applicants and your new employees are going to see on the channeler's website. That top row there with the FedEx envelope is very important. Some of the feedback we're getting is that because this channeler is somewhat new to SBA, they're still in the process of contracting out with places that are going to be local to your folks out in the field. So there are some people, like for instance, I think North Carolina doesn't have any locations where they can go. If that's the case, this option here is going to pop up on the applicant screen, that FedEx envelope option. If they click that, what's going to happen then is that they'll be able to download and print from their local computer a fingerprint card that they can use and take with them to their local police station to get fingerprinted. So this is a very important thing for you to be aware of, so you can pass that along to anyone who needs to get fingerprinted. If there's not a live scan location within 25 miles of the person who needs to get fingerprinted, make sure they know about this option. And I've got a first question on this. It says, are 1081s to be uploaded to E-Tran also? Not right now. We don't have that process in place. The reason why we can upload 912s is because 912s are associated with a particular loan. So when the CDC goes in, they can attach that 912 to a loan. We don't have the similar mechanism for 1081s, but maybe at some point in the future we're working on that with our friends over in OPSM. Lastly, how to avoid delays. The single biggest thing here, guys, is that we're getting incomplete packages. More than half of the character determination packages that we get do not have the required court documentation attached to them. So if we don't have the court documentation, we cannot process your fingerprint request or character determination request. If the court documentation is not available, there are some options. But if you can't provide us any information, then your person is not going to be eligible for the loan. All right, we have another question here. If we already have the hard copy fingerprint card completed, can we still send it in for processing? Michelle or LaShun, you want to deal with that?
Yes, if they already have the hard copy fingerprint card, I'd be more than glad to accept it.
Okay.
And the address is right in the SOP, 409 3rd Street. And they could just send it in but again, this is just if they already have it.
Yeah, if they already have it. But we are, for 912s, you must use the applicant, and for 1081s, we are on the verge of saying must. It really does expedite the process. It's a lot easier for everyone all around, and you get a response much more quickly. Do we have any other questions on that before we move on? All right. So we're going to move on to OFPO. I think that they don't have anything for us, but he was in here. He said hello earlier. SLTC, Ian, are you guys ready to go with your presentation?
Yes, we are, and thank you, Ginger. Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, we thank all of you for participating in the call today. As you know, the end of this fiscal year is just around the corner, and I'm sure you all agree with me that fiscal year 19 is a great year. It's great because, you know, the volume has steadily increased during the year, and that means that we are providing more and more capital access to all of our small business owners. During the months of August and September, the volume continues to increase, and that assures us another strong finish to this fiscal year. And we'd like to thank everyone for the patience. We are processing these loans as fast as we can. Even with the increase in volume, you know, we still maintain a very good first-pass yield of 60%. And we also maintain a very reasonable and efficient turn times in all areas of loan processing. So we can't thank all the CDCs enough for their commitment to provide high-quality packages to the center so that we can approve more loans and we can approve them in a timely manner. We're looking forward to the NECO annual meeting next month in Tennessee, and we will provide a couple of general sessions where we will talk about the best practices on some of the most common processing topics. Now, what we're excited about the incoming new fiscal year, we are sad to say farewell to Bea. You know, we appreciate her leadership. We thank her for her energy. We thank her for her compassion and support, and we will miss her. At the same time, we would like to welcome Fred to the family, and we're looking forward to working with him to further strengthen our already strong partnership with the industry. So welcome aboard, Fred. With that, I'd like to thank again for your participation, and I'm going to turn it over to Zane Costello, our supervisory loan specialist, and Jessica Titano, our loan specialist, to discuss tips and practices on some of the common processing topics. Thank you again.
Okay, so as far as the Form 1244 goes, talked to some of our important staff here that handles the logging in of the loans, and they gave me a couple of tips of things that they're seeing that are causing the loan to get screened out before it even goes to a loan officer. So we'll go through these pretty quick. The first one is please make sure that you're using the latest version of the 1244. That's something that the people that log in loans say that they do see every now and then, and that causes them to have to screen out the loan. Next slide. As far as the 1244 form, the 912's been incorporated into it now, 1244XIX. You just need to make sure that all those questions, you see the highlighted areas, everything needs to be answered, everything needs to be initialed. Signatures need to be provided at the bottom of the page. So make sure everything is completed. Power of attorneys are not allowed on this form. So we want to make sure that you understand that. And again, just as with the 1244 in general, make sure that you're using the most common, the most current form on this. Okay? Next slide. The other area that we're seeing some issues on is the bankruptcy and lawsuit question in the back of the 1244. Make sure that both of these questions are answered and that they're answered appropriately. One of the issues we've seen with bankruptcies over the last couple of years is a lot of times applicants have been told by their attorney that after 7 years or 10 years, it doesn't show up on the credit report anymore, so they answer no to the question, even though they had a bankruptcy maybe 12 years, 20 years ago. That's not correct for the way that we want the form filled out. Any prior bankruptcy, so if they've ever filed bankruptcy, that question should be answered yes. And if we find out from LexisNexis that there is a bankruptcy and they've marked no, certainly you will get a screen out on that. Okay, next slide. And then as far as any of the projects that you send in that have a debt refinance component, please make sure that the Part D of the 1244 is included, and then also make sure that the appropriate language for the type of debt refi that it is included in the third-party lender letter. And those are the tips that our staff, like I said, that log in the loans, those are the items that they say they see the most frequently and that lead to screen outs. With that, I'll turn it over to Jessica. She's going to go over a few things that loan officers are noticing with regards to the 1244.
Hi, everyone. This is Jessica. As mentioned, we're going over the 1244, and we're covering those areas where we see the most errors or missing information when we're reviewing a file. So, as an overall, the 1244 serves as a roadmap for the application. It should match E-Tran, it should match the credit memo, and everything that's submitted along with it. And when we look at page 1, it really is just, a snapshot, a synopsis of what we expect to see to be covered and discussed in the credit memo. Next slide, please. So one of the common errors is the TPL information. It's listed on page 2 of the 1244 generally, and when we're looking at E-Tran, we do find that there's oftentimes missing either the interim lender or perhaps the participating lender. It's there, but it's not correctly identified in the drop-down box. And then sometimes we find that the SBA partner ID or partner location ID don't match between the two. So maybe it was entered in for one but not the other. And so those are things that we need to see, that we need to go back in and try and fix or clarify. Another issue is the name and contact number for the lender. So that information is necessary to be entered into E-Tran for us to be able to process the loan through. So please remember to include both the contact name and the telephone number for both the participating and the interim lender. Okay, next slide. So when we look at the equity injection, these are the two most common areas that we run into, and they're really related to acquisitions and expansions. So a lot of the times, in E-Tran, it may be coded as a new business and there's only a 10% injection. Well, that creates an error on our side. So when you run into those cases, if it's a business acquisition, please check change of ownership, and that would justify the 10% injection. And if it's an expansion, please check existing more than 2 years old. That way those bases are covered. Okay, next slide, please.
Jessica, we've got a couple questions. Would you mind pausing here to respond?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm not seeing the questions. If you can relate them.
Sure will. So the first one is, we are currently entering a lender location ID, but not a lender ID. Are both fields now available and needed?
Okay. So normally, if you do the location ID, that'll populate the other field. So as long as you enter that in, it should populate and it'll match, but we're asking that you make sure that you include that partner location ID for both the participating and interim lender. That way they match.
And the next question is, what if the TPL does not have a location ID or partner ID? Is this a problem?
The answer is yes. For it to be entered into the system and us to be able to process it, that has to be identified.
Yeah. Chris, something?
Yes, Steve Kucharski is going to something.
So just real quick, is that just getting back on this, is that it is possible that a third-party lender will not have a location ID. Keep that in mind, because as you know, a third-party lender doesn't necessarily have to have a lending agreement with us. So if you don't have a lending agreement with us, there's potentially on a location ID. So there is that disconnect. I know it's a smaller amount that most of the third-party lenders do, but how are you all handling those?
Steve, this is here, and I think the TPL would have to work with us and the district office to have that issue resolved.
Okay.
I think we have cases that we are able to do that, even though they don't need to have a 750 agreement with the district, but they can work with the district and us.
Perfect. Okay. So in those scenarios, that's where they would go. They would work with the district. Great. Thanks, Ian.
Welcome.
And we got a question from a minute or so ago asking if SLPC will be working over the weekend, and the answer is no, they won't be, not this weekend. All right, Jessica, go ahead. Did you need me to advance the slide?
Yes, project costs, please. So for project costs, please, just a quick reminder that they should be aligned from the 1244 to E-Tran to the credit memo, all of those. But particularly in relation to business acquisitions, please make sure that those project costs are aligned with the appraisal as well. Because a lot of times, like in an example of a hotel, maybe the whole amount was allotted to real estate, but when the real estate appraisal comes in, it doesn't support that full amount because some FF&E was in there. So please make sure that you break it down according to the appraised value and make sure that the 1244 matches what was inputted in E-Tran. Okay.
And Jessica, we have another question from the same person who asked about the TPL. I think they're following up with the conversation between Steve and Hean. They said, what needs to be resolved if there's no partner or location ID? I think the answer is that they'll talk to Hean and...
Yeah, it's not a problem. It's not necessarily, it's just all we're looking for is how to come up with a code to get it in so we can track that third-party lender. Third-party lenders are always a little tricky because they don't necessarily have to have 750 agreements. But it was great that Hean jumped in. It sounds like there is a relationship. So if one of those scenarios pops up, where there's a CDC that's working with a third-party lender, where there is no location ID present, Hean has that path that they've established with the district office, and that way we can get a number to identify them so we can track them in the system.
Thanks, Steve. All right, Jessica, back to you.
Thank you. Next slide, miscellaneous. Just some quick things. Please, as a reminder, I know we sent these out in emails before, please round to the nearest 100. It just makes everything easier and make sure that we don't run into any issues where you might need the 10% and the 15%, but it was just below the percent required when rounding. Please do not round when it comes to the real estate amount. That one generally is a specific amount that you need to stick with, but when rounding, go ahead and use the professional fees or the contingency and other sections. And then we don't see this as much as we used to when we first implemented the fee, but we do still see the fee missing in some of them, and as far as that goes, that changes the debenture amount, and then that needs to be updated in E-Tran for us to be able to continue to approval and funding. So please make sure that you include that. I know other people covered it, but make sure everything is signed. Make sure everything is initialed. If there's any corrections, please just go ahead. I know everything's scanned over here to the center, but please just go ahead and cross them out and initial, and that should help you to avoid any potential screen-ups.
And And I want to add to what Jessica's saying, that I can't tell you when we get to closing and there's $1 difference because someone didn't just round, and it slows up the whole closing. And so please take extra care to do that at the application stage, so that will prevent a problem when we get to closing.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Ian, are you, is your team finished with your side of the presentation?
Yes, we are.
All right, thanks so much. We're going to...
Well, one thing I wanted to make sure that people were aware of, we sent this out in the weekly, but there was a time right after we rolled out 504 refi, and it was a new initiative, that we had a special email box for refi questions. But now refi is a permanent part of the program. So in addition to all the other questions you send to SLPC, please send refi questions into the 504 questions email box. So thank you for your help with that.
We have a question about how far out they need to round percentages. You guys have an answer to that? Not sure.
It has to be, if it's 10% required, it has to be, it can't be, I mean, if it's 9.9999 forever, it won't work. It has to be 10 or 10.0001. It has to be at least 10%. Can't be a fraction of a penny below 10%.
And I will say this, if your fraction, if you're trying to round up or round down, you want to stay at 39.99999% in your 504. Don't go over. Don't make it 41% by mistake by rounding up, because then we statutorily cannot make that adjustment for you, no matter how much of an inconvenience it is to go back and re-record your documents for closing. So please, when it comes to that 40% SBA participation, you might even want to take a precaution and round down just to make sure you don't bump up against that percentage.
All right, thanks, guys. Now we're going to turn it over to Okram, and Eddie Ledford is our special guest speaker here from the 7A program. He's got a great presentation on SBA Form 159, and he's going to talk to us about agents and fees.
Yep. So we're going to walk you through today. Most of you guys are probably familiar with Paul Kerwin. He's the team lead for the 504 CDC program. And so they've asked me to come in today and just have a discussion with you about the 159s. As it goes through, the Office of Credit Risk Management, we're watching the activity on the 159s, really looking to see what the cost to the borrowing population is out there. Now, with the 159, one of the things we're looking at is, we want to know what it costs to borrowers. In order to do that, we need to ensure that the 159 is an accurate representation of the transaction. So we'll kind of start out with some of the most common exceptions and errors that we see there, and we'll go into detail as we go through the rest of the slides. The first one is one of the more basic ones. It's as you go through and you do the Form 159, just ensure that you fill it out in its entirety and that you sign the form. We'll expand on that in a few minutes as we break the form into a couple of different sections. And then the second one there is the FERS number. When you do that entry, make sure that you only use the 7 figures in the FERS number. It'll either start with an A, a C, maybe even an H, or it'll just be 7 numbers. You shouldn't have any dashes in that number, and you also shouldn't have any more than 7. We have seen some that do kind of an additional add-on to identify locations, but you should keep that to just your FERS number. Another thing that you'll want to ensure that you do as you go through this is an agent reporting thing. So whenever you're required to test SAM.gov, make sure that you do that testing. And one of the things that we're seeing that come up with lenders recent months is when you do have a possible hit, let's say you have a common name, a John Smith out there that comes back as being debarred by a different agency, that you go through the required steps to clear that possible hit. You will have to work with the debarring agency to get verification from them. We have seen some lenders that are just writing a statement that they've known John his whole life, he's never lived in New York, and they're doing a clearing that way, and unfortunately that does not meet the requirements. You do have to work with that debarring. And then the final step there is make sure that you upload the Form 159. The slide says to the physical transfer agent. However, understand with the 504 loans that you guys actually upload those directly to E-Tran within 30 days of that initial disbursement. So we'll move on to the next slide. One of the things that comes up is, the Form 159, one of the main points that it captures is packaging. So the question comes up often is, well, what constitutes packaging? Well, as we look at the first slide here, the lender had 5 entries. Actually, only one of the 5 is an actual packaging service. The first one is an allowable fee. When they're talking about financial consulting services provided to the applicant, including meetings and things of that nature. That's an allowable fee, but it's a consulting fee. So it's not a packaging fee, and it needs to be identified on the Form 159 as a consulting service provided. As you go through 2 and 3, you know, the pre-screen collection of financials, doing a complete analysis, and then the last one doing the analysis of the credit reports, those are all inherently lender functions. So those are things that we expect the lender to do at no cost to the borrower. Now with the last one, when you're looking at credit reports, as a packager, if you're helping to basically craft a response for any derogatories, you could make the case there that is a packaging fee, but you have to be taking the case of, you know, let's say the lender has one 30-day late, you help them craft a response, explains why that was 30 days late, that could be considered packaging. So as we go into the next slide, you'll see a continuation there. The first 3, where it's talking about doing an analysis of credit reports, doing a revised global cash flow, and then finalizing underwriting, those are all, again, inherently lender functions. Those are things that should be done at a cost to the lender that cannot be passed on to the borrower. Now, one thing that you know about packaging and other services, it has to be, the charges have to be associated with services that were actually performed. So in the last one there, where it talks about funding completion support, we have 2 issues there. A, that's not a packaging service. That's something that's post-closing, helping handle disbursements. The second issue, you can see we have it highlighted, is it's an in-process estimate. Therefore, those fees have not, or for services that have not been performed, therefore you cannot assess those to the applicant. So there's a couple issues there. Is A, they haven't happened, and B, they're not packaging. So those are pretty common examples as it goes through of things that we see in the Form 159 that are prohibited fees. Now, as you guys know, the SBA reserves the right to go in, review the files, and we can assess, we can make a requirement that you refund any fees that we determine are unreasonable or unnecessary. So one of the questions that also comes up as you go through is how do we test these? So from a credit risk standpoint, we go through and we have a couple of scenarios that we go through to test. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see we look at a loan tape. Loan tape is nothing more than your data set. So we'll ask you for information as you go through the review. Maybe it's to provide a list of loans, you know, the packaging fees that were charged or the referral fees. We then take the information that you provide to us and we compare that to SBA data. And what we're looking at there is we're hoping to have a high level of match. If not, we start looking at what causes the disconnect. Those disconnects are typically caused in the box to the right. So we have the basic 7A requirements, which I know differ from what the 504 community has. I mean, we have a 1919 and a 1920 and a 1050, which are forms that you guys don't have, but you do have other forms that we would use for reconciliation.
However, many of our CDCs are CA lenders, and so they would be familiar with this form. Okay.
So if you're doing community advantage, you would see those forms. So that's one of the tests we start is we look at those 4 forms, and you can see the Form 1919, regardless of which program you're in, 504, Community Advantage, 7A, the SBA standard forms have standard responses. Now, when you get to the credit memorandums, those are non-standardized, but the SOP has basic requirements. So that's where we start looking for that standardization to compare that to the other SBA forms. Now, we've got the Form 1919 here, which, you know, I mentioned a few minutes ago is not something that you guys, mostly the lending community uses for 504, but we'll just kind of give you a brief overview because there's probably similar SBA forms that you're utilizing. If you see at the top, it talks about provide a written response on a separate sheet for any affirmative answers. So when you get into question 10 for us, which is looking at if the applicant paid a packager, the additional form provided, in this case, is going to be the Form 159. Now, one of the questions that comes up is, you know, as you guys know, applications are fluid. So when your initial application documents are filled out, the applicant may not be aware that a packager is going to be involved. They may not realize the complexity of the application and what exactly it entails. So they may check a no at this point when the packager is actually used and identified later. So one of the questions that come up is, what do you do if it changes? So you've got a couple of options here. If it changes, the most common solution is you just do a memo to file, documented at the time of application the applicant wasn't aware, the packager became involved at a later date. That way you've got consistency in your package. The second one is to go back into the form, make the change, and if you do make the change, ensure that you initial and date it, and that the applicant also does an initial and date in order. So as we go on to the next slide, this is for Form 1920. This is for the 7A community. This is where the lender responds whether or not a packaging fee was paid by the applicant. This is where the story really starts to build itself up. So when we look at the 1919 and the 1920, we're looking at consistency between these two documents. So if we see a yes in the 1919, we're looking for a yes in the 1920 because we have to have consistency as it goes through. Now, as we go into the next slide, this is going into the Form 1050. This is the 7A program settlement sheet. It was recently enhanced to give more of a breakout of the use of proceeds. And you can see as it goes through, we've highlighted the settlement charges and the out-of-pocket costs. If you have packaging fees, that's where that's reported on the 1050. So ensure that as it goes through on the 1050 that you enter the amounts there. And as a sidebar, one of the things that we've seen in recent reviews of lenders is they're failing to complete this section. They're just putting a 0. You have to ensure that you put the amount of the disbursements there. So make sure you fill out the Form 1050 in its entirety. So now we get into the Form 159, so we're back into common territory for everyone on the call. So we really broke this down into separate pieces because as OCRM has done various reviews, we've seen different issues with the completion of the form. And one of the things that we do with the reviews is we try to determine the cause. Because we want to see if it is an issue with the kind of the presentation of the form or if it's a problem with the interpretation. And most of the cases that we're looking at, it's nothing more than a lack of training on the form. So what we try to do is really break this down. So when you start the loan, it's the most basic one. You're either doing a 7A loan or a 504. You have to make sure that you check one of the two boxes there. You can't leave that blank. As you get into the next section, it starts to identify who the borrower is, the SBA loan number, your name as the lender, and then the agent's name. You'll want to make sure you have to ensure that you fill out each one of those boxes. Again, it goes up to the SBA loan number with no spaces. There you should only put the loan number, just the digits, no dashes, no spaces, just a continuous string of numbers as it goes across. And again, with the SBA FERS number, that is the FERS number, not the location ID. So make sure that as you set your system up that it's set to capture the FERS number.
Anyway, we have one question here which I can answer. The question is, if you have a professional services contract with the CDC and are paid by the CDC, you do not complete a 159? And the answer is, that's correct. If you're doing the services that are within the confines of the professional services contract, and if we have reviewed your professional services contract and approved it, you do not fill out a Form 159 for those services. But there might be other instances where you are agent, like, well, I won't go into that, but the answer is no, you do not fill out a Form 159 for professional services.
Well, I would say, to add on to what Ginger's saying, that if the professional service you're providing matches, you know, and for example, I say, I have a contract for marketing for the CDC, but my contract wasn't for packaging. In the process of marketing, I can help package the CDC. For that one loan, you might do the 159 because your actual contract was for marketing. So if your services included marketing as opposed to processing, we would look at that.
And that's great. And also, if we could go back to that slide for just a second, one thing that comes up is clarification. So let's say that you as the lender are the agent providing the services. So you'd have the SBA lender name, which would be like ABC, CDC, which is a bad acronym, but there we have it. So then the service is performed by, it would be the name of the employee that provided that. The agent contact person would again be the person that provided the service, and then the agent address would be the CDC's address. So that's one of the things that's coming up is when the lender provides the services, what sections there need to be completed. You still need to complete all. So then you get into the next part of the Form 159, which is the type of agent. So you're going to check all that apply as long as it's the same agent. So if I'm an agent, I can provide, so I just lost my spot there. So the type of agent is you're going to be the SBA lender, the independent loan packager, the referral agent, or the consultant. So as it goes through, At that point, so you're the agent, you check what you are. So as it goes through the Form 159, it's supposed to be completed by the agent, so that's where the selection comes in. So if you're the CDC, you select SBA lender. If it's an independent loan packager, of course there, referral loan agent. And then if you guys remember, as we looked at the fees that weren't allowed, you could have the consultant who helps with the financial package prep. So you'd have the consultant, and then also for CDC, third-party lender or the TPL there.
And Eddie, you can check more than one of those boxes, correct?
Yes. And the next one is a box that's new to the current Form 159. As it goes through, we've kind of highlighted the sum of each of the columns needs to go down to the number. So you've got amount paid by applicant, and you bring that down to the applicant line below. You've got the amounts paid by the SBA lender, and you bring that to the line below. Make sure that those numbers reconcile. In recent reviews, we've seen where the columns didn't add up, either vertically or horizontally. So just do a quick test of the math there, just to make sure that the numbers all reconcile. And this is for your 504 loans, and this is in the instance where the CDC received a referral fee from the TPL. It's pretty basic. You'll need to fill it out in its entirety. You complete the amount of the fee, the third-party lender name, and the third-party lender address.
And Eddie, what about when the CDC gives the referral to the TPL?
I think that's on the next slide. Or
coming up.
Okay. So we got applicant certification as it goes through. So the small business applicant will sign and certify there with basically their signature, the date, the printed name, and the title. As we look at the next slide, you've got the agent certification. This is where the agent will do the same. The agent will sign, print, date, and give their title. And then as the next slide, the SBA lender will do the same. So you have to collect 3 signatures here. Now, one thing that we've seen come up in recent reviews is depending on who your documentation software provider is, we're seeing some of the forms generate with instead of the actual signatures here, it'll say see addendum, and then there's an addendum that's provided for signature. SBA is in the process of reviewing that, and the preliminary determination is that does apply with the SBA loan program requirements. So as you generate the Form 159, you need to ensure that the form is what's signed and it's not an attachment or an addendum to the form. So going on to the next slide, we've got the Form 159 data chart. So this gives you an idea, because when you look at the data, you often kind of wonder, well, where does it all go and what happens? So when we look at the Form 159, there's a couple of inputs as it goes through. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, you've got 3 main contributors. You've got you guys as the lender, the applicant, and then there's a third-party agent as it goes through. As we discussed as we walk through the 159, you can see that there's different sections for different parties to complete and sign. So you've got the 159 that's fed through. You'll want to make sure that you've got all the required entries and then that you've got the itemization if that's required. Once you have all that information for the CDC community, you would then ensure that you upload that 159 to E-Tran. Now, from an SBA standpoint, if it's 7A, we look for you to submit it to the FTA, which is currently Colson Services Corp. The FTA then transmits that data to the SBA. We then do a comparison to E-Tran to make sure that we have a reconciliation there. Now, after we do our reconciliation, we have 3 primary users. It'd be Diane Seaborn and her group in OFA, Susan Strike's group at the Office of Credit Risk Management, and various other parties. So, you know, as you do the 159, it's not a form that just kind of goes and becomes stagnant in place. It's something that's continuously monitored for the long.
Eddie, we've got a question here. If a TPL is paying a referral fee to a third party, if a TPL is paying a referral fee on the third-party loan to a third party, does a Form 159 need to be filled out? So we don't collect data for fees that are for the third-party lender's loan, right, Eddie?
I believe so. I mean, it's well outside my wheelhouse, but I believe that you're correct.
The third-party lender has oversight from their regulatory authorities, so SBA would not ask, in the way that we do ask on the 750 because we have an agreement with them. As Steve pointed out in the earlier discussion, we don't have the 750 agreement with the TPL, So their regulator is responsible for monitoring their fees at that level.
All right, excellent.
And an agent can do multiple services on 159.
Correct. Yeah. So, the main defining the main defining item there is one agent can do multiple services on 159. But if you have, so let's say you have one agent, they provide 5 services. Those can all be on the same 159. If you have 2 agents who provide separate services, each agent has to have a separate 159. So just make sure as you go through that you're taking into consideration who's providing the service and make sure that each agent has its own form. One of the things that will come up currently is, let's say that you have a third-party packager, and then at the same time the lender paid a referral agent. So you'd have 2 159s there if they're not the same agent. You would have 159 for the third-party packager and then a 159 for the referral source.
And Eddie, let's talk about packaging. Even, let's say, can the borrower ever be charged twice for packaging?
No, packaging as it goes through, and that's one of the things that we're seeing commonly is as it goes through, packaging services can only be charged one time. One of the things that really comes up, which you won't see much in the 504 community, is when you have companion loans and you try to charge the same packaging for both loans. Companion loans are to the same borrower, basically made at the same time for different purposes. So as you go through and ensure that you're only charging the applicant one time for each service.
For the lender, that it's for the loan, not necessarily for fees to the borrower.
Correct. Yep. So then we get into fees. As it goes through, these are kind of general statements from things that we've seen. You can't charge a standard fee. It has to be for the services actually performed based on the scenario. If it's over $2,500, you have to have supporting documentation. You have to have the itemization. That has to be submitted to the FTA, which in the case of 504s, you'd have to upload that to E-Tran. If it's less than $2,500, you have to retain that information in the file in case OCRM decides to do a review later on. Now, when you get into fees, they may be paid by either the small business applicant or the SBA lender. And as Ginger mentioned earlier, brought up, each service may only be charged once, and then the SBA reserves the right to review any fees charged to the applicant. So as we went through the review cycle this year, from a 7A standpoint, we determined that the majority of the fees that we saw were fairly reasonable. We looked at it, kind of from a percentage of loan amount and also from the actual services performed. And the most common exceptions that we saw were lenders were charging for inherently lender functions. So in most cases, we saw a fair level of reasonableness in the lending community. It's just some minor tweaks need to be made in order to improve the compliance there.
So, Eddie, are deposits considered fees?
Deposits? No. No, as it goes through, deposits would be something that the applicant gets back. And also, we'll talk in a few minutes. I believe we've got a slide that discusses kind of deposits for third-party costs. So we'll kind of discuss that in just a second as it goes through as well. So we'll go to the next slide.
Sorry.
So we discussed, costs associated with underwriting the loan. So, we discussed earlier that you can't pass on those inherently lender functions, the cost with underwriting. The same with having a processing fee. Those are the same as underwriting, which is not permitted. One of the questions that comes up too is how do you look at your software and you pass that cost on? So let's say that you have a subscription or a contract with a third party to generate loan documents, and they charge you $100,000 a year, and you go through and you figure that you're going to do 10,000 that's a loan document, so you try to average that cost. There's a couple of problems there. A, it's a cost of doing business, so we expect the lender to absorb that cost. The second one is you're using an average and not the actual cost, so that's prohibited from 2 different angles. So as you go through, make sure that you're not passing on the cost of software to the applicants, which gets into the next one, which is talking about the average. And we're seeing that more with electronic signatures. So be very aware of that as it goes through. We've seen where you may engage a third party for the ability to obtain electronic signatures. Just make sure that you're not passing those costs through. So now we get into, as Linda mentioned earlier or asked about like deposits. We know that a lot of times you'll take a deposit, especially for third party expenses that are coming up because, no one wants to get stuck paying for a phase 2 or a commercial appraisal. So when you have out-of-pocket expenses, those are direct costs. Direct costs would be things like UCC, filings, recording fees, photocopy, and things like that. Those don't need to be recorded on 159 as their direct cost. Anything you want to look at, you want to figure out if it's a direct cost, it's an expense that's a result of an SBA policy requirement. So we require you take collateral. So therefore, the direct cost would be doing the lien searches and doing the filing. We require you get appraisals. Therefore, it would be the direct cost. What happens when lenders put the direct cost on the 159 by accident is it inflates the view of the 159. It makes it appear that packaging services are a lot more expensive to the borrowing community than they actually are. So be cognizant as you go through of 159 completion, just to ensure that you don't overinflate the numbers. And then it gets us into kind of the common errors. You know, we talked about this, but we'll reiterate because we are seeing it in a high volume. Make sure that you put the SBA loan number on the form. If you look at this form versus the form that was in place before November 1st of 18, the SBA loan number is now kind of front and center. On the previous form, it was on page 3 at the bottom. So we do understand why people were missing it back in 2017 and early 2018. But at this point, please make sure that you've got the SBA loan number entered. And then also make sure you identify the type of agent. We also just talked about, you know, be careful when you have out-of-pocket expenses and direct costs. Make sure that the information is not misleading or inflating the figure. And then also we talk about LSPs and other agents. You know, as it goes through the last part there, make sure that if the lender is required to sign, that you guys as the lenders are doing the signatures. We have seen instances where someone would sign on behalf of the lender. That's not allowed. So just make sure as you go through when it asks for the lender that someone who's employed by the bank executes that document. Now you look at it and we say, how do we stay out of trouble? You know, as you look at it, you have to decide, you know, as it goes through, the main thing, regardless of the program, whether it be 504 or 7A, is you want to have consistent documentation. You know, as it goes through, you know, Linda mentioned a few minutes ago, you get to closing, have some numbers off, and a delayed closing. That speaks to the consistency. The same with the 159s. As this thing goes through, you'll want to make sure that you have consistency. One way to ensure that you have the consistency, it's a very simple pre-closing checklist. You know, we always tell everybody, you know, the first step is make sure you have the form, make sure it's fully complete, and make sure it's accurate. So once you have that, that's a very simple pre-closing checklist. It's 3 simple boxes. And then right before submission, you know, goes in, before you put it into E-Tran, someone should take one fast look just to make sure that those 3 requirements are met, upload it to E-Tran, and you should be good to go. Ultimately, what you want to know is when you read it as a second-level reviewer, you want to be able to look at that very quickly, know what's done, who did it, and who paid. If you've got all that, then you're in good shape. One of the main things, too, to remember as you go through the 159s and packaging services, if OAK reviews the file and sees that there's unnecessary or unreasonable expenses been charged to the applicant, we hold the lender responsible. So as it goes through, if there's refunds that are required, we actually look to the CDC or the 7A lender to do that refund. So as it goes through, we've got a couple of best practices. There's been some discussion on page 3 of 3 about obtaining agent signatures and some of the verbiages around that. From an OCRM standpoint, we recommend as a best practice that you always obtain that agent signature. It's a little different for you guys in the 504 community. We talk about retaining documentation to support submission to the FTA. So that's something that's not applicable if you're a 504 lender. But if you're involved in any type of 7A and you're working with Colson Services, that would be applicable. And then retain documentation to support the testing of the System for Awards Management, which is commonly known as SAM. The SOP currently has a requirement that you test it, but it doesn't go as far as say as you have to retain documentation. I anticipate that that'll change in a future version, so it's best to just go ahead and start that practice now. And plus, if we come in to test, we're going to look at checklists to see that you've tested SAM.gov, but an easier solution is just to be able to present a screenshot to show that you actually tested it that has the date of testing. So, you know, ultimately as it goes through to, I know this was a lot of information. I have a tendency to talk very fast when I have a lot to get through. This is probably in actuality a 2 to 3 hour presentation to go through all the nuances of the 159, the packaging fee, the other third-party agent fees as it goes through. We appreciate you guys bearing with us because, you know, as it goes through, our goal here is to make you guys successful as it goes through. I mean, we're looking at program integrity. We want a long-standing program, and we appreciate all the work that you guys do and the understanding. So as you go through, if you have any questions or concerns, definitely don't hesitate to let us know.
Thanks, Eddie. That was great.
Thanks, everyone, for joining today's call. A few wrap-up things that we want to talk about, and then we'll get into any remaining Q&A that we have that we can answer. And if we can't answer your question today because we ran out of time, we'll follow up with you offline. So we wanted to make sure everyone had the 912 and 1081 email box emails. A question came up earlier about what about electronic fingerprints and the 1081 process, whereas you can't upload the 1081 into the corporate governance E-Trans system. That system's being built. You can still use the electronic fingerprint process for 1081s, and so anyone who needs assistance with that, just give us an email request to the 1081 email box, and someone will get back to you. Usually people just load in their information into the email box. If you accidentally send it to the 504 request email box, it could delay it, although we do check that every day. Just the day that it takes me to log in and forward it over to the 1081 email box, that's the day that you've delayed your clearance. So please try to make sure you send in all the 1081s right email box. And then the 504 questions email box we talked about earlier, SLPC monitors that. And we learn a lot from the questions that you send in on the 504 program questions. We take a review of all the questions, and then we look at how we need to update the next SOP for clarity. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Ginger for some upcoming call announcements, but we want to let you know, those of you who are eagerly waiting the 504 debenture funding calendar, that we're in the final processes of getting that 508 compliant and on the website, so we'll be sending that out through the agency's website and through NADCO very soon.
All right, so we've got some upcoming calls. The 7A Connect call is coming up soon on October 8th. And then the next 504 Connect call is in December, and the reason why that date is in red and bold is because that's a different date than we announced earlier in the year. So the next 504 Connect call is December 17th, and both the 7A and the 504 Connect calls allow you to pre-register at the links, and most of you probably did that for today's call. That was the first time we've done that for the 504 Connect call. So I'd be interested in any feedback you have regarding that. Also, since we're going to be doing this from now on, please make sure you whitelist no reply at event-services.com. I got a few, probably about a dozen emails from CDC saying that they never got a response back from the webinar folks, and most likely it was caught up in your spam filters. So please make sure you go ahead and take a moment to do that after the call.
Well, now we're going to stay on with the diehards who had some Q&A that we haven't gotten to, and there's one that I wanted to address that someone sent in a request about IVES, that they thought that they had to go through a third-party intermediary to register with IVES, and you can register directly with the IRS. It's only about $4 a transaction. So that is $2 now. Thank you, Ginger. That cost has gone down. So that's one that we know that we can answer.
And they were saying they had some issues. I wish Michelle was still in the room here, or Tommy, but the IRS, if you go to the irs.gov website and pull up the 4506T, their most current version of that form is not compatible with IVES. We put out an email blast. Hean sent out an email blast, I think, 2 weeks ago with the link to the form that IVES will accept. I think it was March 2019, if I recall correctly. Hean, I hate to put you on the spot. Do you remember the date of that form for the 4506T?
I don't think so, Ginger. I have to look it up. Yeah, I can't remember the date sent, but I know it was sent out recently.
No worries. What I'll do is when I send out an email after the webinar that has the link to the recording so everyone can listen to it or send it to their colleagues who weren't able to sit in today, I'll send out the link to the recording, a copy of today's PowerPoint, And I'll also follow up with that link again to the correct version of the 4506T. I believe it's March 2019. It is available on the IRS.gov website. You just have to scroll down the page a little bit. They have a link there that says something like historical forms or archive forms, something to that effect. So I will get you that information in a couple business days as soon as I have the link to the recording to today's phone call.
So we want to thank everyone for participating in today's 504 Connect call from SBA headquarters. This is Linda Ginger, Jacob, Warren, and Christina signing off. And thank you for an amazing fiscal year. You've done an amazing job in promoting 504 in your community, and we look forward to an even better 2020.
Thanks, guys.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing. Now disconnect.